Well, it's great. It's a good-looking professional crowd here today. Thank you for coming to Solano County, and good to see Randy again, too. I'm taking over for the Solano County Sheriff, Tom Farrar. He wanted to come here and talk to you folks, but he's double booked today, so he put me on this one. So I have an ulterior motive for being here, and I'll get to that in just a few minutes. So I'm Don Ryan. I'm the Emergency Services Manager for Solano County. I've been in the job for about 2 years, and one of the unusual things about Solano County, OES has the dispatch center. So I am somewhat proficient. Most of my experience is 25 years in the Air Force talking on simplex radios, and I've got a good story about shutting down Chicago O'Hare for 15 minutes with my pubs bag sitting on a microphone. So I'm not an expert, but I'm going to try to get through this. So here's Solano County for you. All these different colors are all the agencies that Solano dispatches except the city. So I have 6 fire protection districts. I have probation. I have fire and law enforcement in Rio Vista and also in the city of Dixon. I normally have 3 dispatchers on at any given moment, and we handle 150,000 calls a year or more, and it's extremely busy in a small room, about 20 by 20. So we're looking to improve, and one of the things I need is from you folks is a little help with some frequencies. So when we have a large fire in one of our municipal districts or the fire districts, anything above 4th alarm, it gets dumped on Solano OES, and we have no idea what's been going on for the first 3 alarms. I don't know where the fire trucks are. I don't know who's responding. Have absolutely no idea what's going on. So my dispatchers take these on cold. They'll call Vallejo for an engine, and Vallejo says that engine's already there on scene. We just don't know. So what we do is we bring in a fire chief to be our OES coordinator, and he works off a legal pad and writes down which engines are on scene. So it's not a very good way to do business. We want to do a consolidated dispatch in Solano County, and we have a lot of political issues to get over before we can actually do that. So, the colors are basically tell you how complicated it is here in Solano County. So this is our frequency sheet. And when I first got here, one of the most unusual things I saw, and it didn't take an expert to figure it out, but these UHF frequencies here. We have VHF and 800, but the UHF for Vallejo Fire Department, the only ones that use UHF in the county. Well, they have a new fire chief, and they've come to me, and they're looking to either have my dispatch center dispatch them, which would require me to have a bigger room, more dispatchers. I just can't handle that call volume, but they need VHF frequencies. So I was talking to Randy here, working a horse trade. So I'm going to come to your group here in the future when they come up with the cash to buy radios. So we're trying very hard to consolidate everything here in Solano County, but this is the first piece in the puzzle, is to get Vallejo on board. Now, Vallejo Fire, unfortunately, also has a fire district that they contract with, East Vallejo Fire Protection District. So it gets even more and more complicated as time goes on. So, so in our dispatch center, I'm not sure if, well, this will be the next slide. So we have 5 fire protection districts, 3 law enforcement agencies, probation, and basically anybody else in the county that needs a radio dispatch, we do it in Solano. Anything above 4 alarms, it gets extremely complicated, and we want to fix that. We're going to build a new dispatch center as well as a new OES center, and NAPCO is obviously very important to us for this to get this change effected. So Randy told me I was just supposed to introduce you and welcome you to Solano County, and thank you for that, but he said I had a few more minutes. So I'm going to give you an example of our busiest day this year in Solano County was the 4th of July. So if anybody's ever heard of Collinsville, it's right down here. It's a little unincorporated township right on the Delta. Now, it's an old Italian fishing community. Joe DiMaggio's family had a house there, and Joe used to spend his off seasons in Collinsville. Consists of about 20 buildings, 20 homes, and one well in the center of town that feeds all the homes with no shutoff valves. So everybody tries to fight a fire at once, you're not going to get much water pressure. So on the 4th of July, about 1:30, a fire starts in Collinsville. A few minutes later, I get called out to do PIO duties for the fire, and I live in up here north of Travis Air Force Base. I come down here, there's a big wildfire here managed by the City of Dixon Fire. This one's managed by Montezuma Fire. I dispatched both of those. And then as I start on my way down here, over on Liberty Island, another fire starts. And this is all July 4th, probably fireworks related, but we can't prove that. And so here's the town of Collinsville. There's your delta. Here's where the fire started. And we're part of the investigation, so I can't tell you what actually happened or how it started. But the fire came here, 17-mile-per-hour winds, and all these buildings here are on stilts. It's a floodplain. So they're not even on pilings, they're on stilts on concrete blocks that are probably, some of the houses are 80 to 100 years old. And so that fire started here. The individual who either started it or found it started fighting that fire with a garden hose and didn't call 911. He delayed it, you know. We don't know why. Finally, a couple of people that lived here are out in the street yelling and crying. They're all upset that the house is on fire when 911 is finally called. By that time, it's too late. All these houses here in the red area were completely destroyed. A little bit of a fire here on top of a porch, but the winds took it so quickly that even the fire trucks had to get out of there. We busted windshields, we melted car parts, you name it. Everything was gone. But at this point, I had 3 fires going at once. All well, this one was probably it was above 4 alarms, and the other 2 were getting close there. So my dispatch center, without knowing where all the fire assets were, here's your job for the day. And a fire chief had to come in and start from scratch with a piece of paper, figuring out where all the fire assets were and redeploying engines as the fires slowed down. So this is a Google picture of one of the houses prior to the fire, and this is the picture after. It burned so hot and so quickly there weren't even 2x4s sticking out of the ground. So it's and one of our issues here in Solano County, and for everybody in California, you should listen to this: tall, dry grass by structures, piles of firewood, vehicles. When the vehicles burnt, the intensity is so hot that we can't even put them out. We have to back off and hopefully have water. All our water came in on tankers, so that one pump, once the power lines went down, the pump for the city shut down, and so we had to tanker everything in and then throw pumps over the levee and take levee water or delta water and pump it into the city. So that was left of that piece of property. There was that piece of fence. Nice, beautifully manicured lawn. Did a good job with weed abatement. The shrubs aren't very high on the side of the building. They're all well watered and green. And poof, gone. Everything was gone on that piece of property. You still see a little bit of the grass over here, but the fire was so intense when it crossed the road and the main street that none of those properties survived. So this was right when I got there. This was the last house to burn on the very end of the property. The owner had quite a few weapons. Luckily they weren't chambered, but the rounds, thousands of rounds are going off like popcorn in that building. So we had to kind of back off a little bit before we could fight that fire. Here's another picture. The fire started right here behind here, this facility or this building, and then the fire actually started back in this yard and came under the house and was coming out onto the street when they made the first 911 call. The neighbor across the street looked up, saw the fire go over his head and said, "We're done." So he lost his house after making that comment. And there's the rest of that. We do have a couple of 2x4s. Actually, those aren't 2x4s. Those are metal studs from a trailer. So obviously, both those buildings were completely destroyed. And I actually, after the fire was put out, I lost a pair of boots. It was so hot, the road melted my boots. So the sheriff owes me some money. This house was interesting. It was right next to the fire. This is all vinyl siding. And this is what it looks like there. It was the only structure to actually survive that was close to the fire, but we had to red tag it. The building official came in and said, we thought some structural damage actually in the eaves. It got pretty hot up there, melted a bunch of stuff. And all these vehicles here, these vehicles were not registered. They were just sitting there in storage, and the tires and all that, all the plastics make it very difficult to put those fires out. So, so that was our issue on July 4th. 4 fires all at once, 4 alarm or greater, being run by a dispatch center that gets it halfway through the incident. So Solano County needs to go to a consolidated dispatch center, and NAPCO will be a very big part of that. And not only am I obviously a big fan after I showed you this and learned a valuable lesson, but so's the sheriff who owns the major dispatch center. So we'll probably go with a joint powers authority build a consolidated fire and EMS dispatch, just like Sacramento does. Thank you for your briefing there a few weeks ago. And so we want to copy your example and pretty much do the same thing. My whole theory on this is if I build it, they will come. So my first priority is to build a building with all the internet lines and the communications cables and antennas, you name it. I want to be ready to take my customers on. So with that, thank you for coming to Solano County. We love it when people come in and spend money here. I'm open to any questions you might have, and I don't know if we have time or not.
Good morning. We're really pleased to be here. As Scott mentioned, I'm Mike Boyden. I'm with Science Applications International, SAIC, and I'll be joined by Hector Rodriguez of the California Office of Emergency Services. And we're here to talk about FirstNet. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. This is going to be a little bit different than some of the presentations that we gave, because prior to this meeting here, I sat down with Scott and we talked about, what sorts of things would you be interested in. So it ended up being a series of questions, and so the topics here are designed to answer some of those questions. We'll be ranging from talking at the basics. Some of this you'll have heard before about just what FirstNet is, the vision of FirstNet. We'll go into how is it different from what you're used to in the area of radio networks, talk about how you're going to use it, and then finally we're going to be talking about when's this all going to happen and what's happening particularly here in California. Well, that's interesting. There we go. Okay, the vision. FirstNet's vision is to provide emergency responders with the first nationwide high-speed wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. It's a lofty thing and fairly easy to say, but let's just take that concept and move it far into the future. What it means in terms of use cases is, well, let's just imagine a law enforcement officers viewing live video from monitoring cameras inside a school while traveling en route in a police vehicle to address that school emergency. Or imagine paramedics sending video of patient and vital health statistics to emergency rooms from an ambulance while en route to the hospital. Or an incident command center being alerted immediately to a downed firefighter via helmet camera transmitting real-time video and aware of the dangerous surroundings and vital signs via clothing-mounted heat and biosensors. All of those kind of futuristic, exciting type of applications imply an underlying infrastructure, a wireless broadband network, just the sort of thing that FirstNet is planning to construct. Let's talk about constructing this thing. First, just as background, and many of you know this, FirstNet is a part of a national law that was enacted in 2012, and in the act, it set aside through spectrum auctions $7 billion with a B to build a nationwide broadband network. Not only did the act set aside some funding, it also set aside bandwidth, 20 megahertz of spectrum at the 700 megahertz range. And as chairman, or as FirstNet board member Chief Jeff Johnson says, it's the linebacker of spectrum. And really for good reason, because of its propagation and penetration characteristics. It's really sought after. If you were to set that at auction, it'd probably be worth nearly $3 billion alone. For example, the reason being, let's say if they would have allocated us spectrum instead of at 700 megahertz, say at 2.5 gigahertz, like where Sprint is right now, you'd need to build 13 to 15 more cell sites to provide the same coverage as one cell site at 700 megahertz. So it's a very valuable asset that's been provided through the Act. The third thing the Act did, which to me is rather unique, is instead of legislating, thou shalt make it so, they actually talked about how to make it so in terms of specifying a technology. They specified that for this data communications network, we'd use 4G technology, LTE, long-term evolution, which is an international standard. This is something, like I say, that's been the first that I've noticed in that kind of legislation, and is pretty important, and it emphasizes the need for, or the opportunity for interoperability, and particularly the idea here of being an international standard, it gives us a chance to leverage a much wider base, bringing our costs down. Bring the volume up, brings the cost down. This is a data network. So let's start out when we start talking about the data network, what's going to be in your hand? Well, it's not going to be a push-to-talk radio. It's going to be some kind of data device. It's going to be a hardened tablet. It's going to be equivalent of a smartphone, maybe a vehicular router sitting in the back of your trunk. All these are going to be the types of devices that you'll be using on the network. Now here's the network. Starting at the bottom, I want to kind of provide the similarities and differences with respect to a radio access net or a land mobile radio, push-to-talk network. You got the devices. Again, we're not using voice radios here. We're using data terminals. Those are connected through what they call the RAN, the radio access network. Those two taken together are very close to what you're used to seeing. You know, the antennas, the towers, the equipment that would be associated with a typical land mobile radio. Going up one more notch, here's where it changes. You have two significant layers in this architecture. One that's particularly important is backhaul. There's a network core. You can't do anything without communicating with that. And because this is high bandwidth, you need big pipes, fiber optics. And so there's a lot of backhaul with respect to fiber optic networks, high-speed microwave, digital microwave, that requires you to communicate up to that network core. And finally, there's the network core itself. This network core is going to do things like it's going to provision your service. You're going to be going to it to identify what services you have on a device. It's going to take care of security. And most importantly, part of the network core is the portion that connects you to the data that you're interested in. When this is all said and done, this is all about applications. How are you going to use this data pathway? And so up on the top right, this is going to go to, we talked a lot about dispatch, the next generation 911 centers, computer-aided dispatch files, criminal justice information, CJIS, NLETs, CLETs types of information. The data you work with today will move faster, better, and be more productive and reach farther out in the field with FirstNet. Now, because I was told this is a technical audience, we're going to go lift the hood of this thing and we're going to go a little deep here. Here we go. This is that same network diagram, and you're the first to see it at this level. If you look at it at the bottom, here's the same 4 levels that we talked about. And before, all those words that were in that gray one on the prior slide, well, that's all this up here. So let's just talk about what's really in the FirstNet network. And as you see, it's already significantly more complex than what you're probably used to or typically need in a land mobile radio network. We've talked about the core. Moving right up to the network services platform, there'll be some services that FirstNet provides as part of this cellular network. Again, this is a 4G network, LTE, just like a Verizon or an AT&T provides today. And so there's going to be some ancillary voice services. It's not going to be your mission-critical voice, but there's going to be things like, whoops, sorry about that, pushed the wrong button. There's going to be a push-to-talk capability. It'll be for administrative services types that you'll be able to connect with a gateway to your land mobile radio that's locally available right now, but you'll be able to do it via the FirstNet phone. There's going to be like a commercial-grade voice service. So that's why you see on here voice over LTE, there'll be voicemail, there'll be text. All those sorts of things that you're used to on a smartphone right now will be here. Again, not for mission-critical services, but for those routine day-to-day things, because you've got this Internet Protocol IP-enabled device at your side. Now, it is all about data, so what's really important is that application platform. For FirstNet, we talked about those databases that existing that you'll be working with, that you're working with now and you'll be working with better in the future. They'll also be providing apps of their own. There's going to be a FirstNet app store, just like there's an Apple one, an Android one. There's going to be an app store. There'll be apps that are nationwide, developed and vetted by FirstNet. There'll be third-party apps. Folks, because of this being an actual ecosystem using the standard-based technology, third-party developers that wouldn't be interested in a relatively smaller market of public safety will be now. And so they'll add into it. And then finally, your apps. There's a lot of public safety first responders and others that are already seeing a need today and are developing applications for their smartphones and digital devices. They'll be able to use this FirstNet network. Okay, moving up one more level. This, if you look at it, I spent 15 years in the AT&T Bell system, and what this results is, what I'm seeing here is the insides of a telephone company. What this is a matter of fact, the FirstNet Network Authority, FirstNet, is established as a 501c corporation, so it's essentially a high-speed data internet services company, not-for-profit, within the Department of Commerce. So it's got all the things you expect from a phone company. There's billing, customer relationship management, fraud. There's all sorts of security operations centers, network operations centers. All that will be operating. When you order your FirstNet service, you'll be going online just like you would do for Sprint and get your device, it'll get shipped to you. You'll have the opportunity to provision services, what sort of features, those sorts of things. It's going to operate, like I say, very different than what kind of the homegrown, we got to do it, if it's got to be done, we got to do it ourselves type of service that LMR does. All right, we're almost to the top. At the top here in the partner networks, that was the equivalent of that little box out on the right on the prior slide. There's going to be the ability to get to those data services you use today, but there's also going to be another aspect that I want to point out. This is a nationwide network, but it's going to have local control. There's going to be the ability within state, at the state level, to provide, you'll be able to do traffic shaping, you'll be able to determine priority and preemption parameters. You're going to be able to do things, the prior talk about the 4th of July fire, there's going to be asset tracking. You're going to have situational awareness that'll come out of the box with this. So in your local control command center, where it could be as simple as a screen, you'll be able to see where every asset is. If you've got that device attached to you as a person, if you've got it in your rig, those will all appear and you'll know where everything's at just by looking at the network. Okay, with that, let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about the frequency itself and how that's different. If you're going to build a land mobile radio, that's on the top here, network, you're going to look for high places, tops of mountains and things, and put the antenna as high as you can, and you're going to pump it with a lot of power. So you're going to be able to have a range maybe 20, 40 miles. Your handsets will be relatively high powered. Your end devices, 5 watts all the way up to maybe 100 watts. Not so with LTE. LTE is a cellular technology. That's the bottom slide here. What you talk there is cells that are only 1 to 5 miles in diameter. So you're going to need more of them. They're going to be lower. When you see those cell antennas on buildings and things in a metropolitan area, very different parameter, and therefore you've got to have low power devices. So your devices are going to be quarter watt as opposed to many times more. So that's going to require, as I mentioned, a lot more money to build to do the same sort of coverage. That's going to create a challenge for FirstNet. This is how they're planning to address it. Realizing that they have an obligation to provide first responders this network coverage in the 50 states, 5 territories in Washington, D.C., there's no way that anyone could afford to put that many LTE, cellular towers, from here to a knoll on Guam. So what they have currently under development is what they call a 3-in-1 architecture. Turns out that if you look at if you look on the bottom here, this designation here of the different types of geography, that's a census designation, and what happens is in probably 9% of the geographic territory is where 85% of people live. So most people are, they're right here, living right in here. Now, that's fine except for when you address incidents, they aren't necessarily where people live. And so you need to provide first responder coverage across that entire swath. And so what they're planning to do is with this 3-in-1 network, they'll start out on this end in the urban areas with that LTE technology, but as they move out into the rural and then finally into wilderness, they'll add on things like satellite communications. There's been talk of actually launching a public safety satellite, although I think there's plenty of bandwidth on some of the others they could obtain some space on. They talk about deployables, the cell-on-wheel type of technology, and you bring your network with you to an incident area. And then finally, in the remotest of remotest, and we were talking, Tim was there talking about the, in Fish and Game, when you're out where there is absolutely nothing and you're in the shadow of a mountain. There's what they call off-net mode. This would be like your direct connect that you're used to. When no one else there, you can talk radio to radio. That's something they're looking at the very worst case. So it actually becomes a blend. Matter of fact, former Chairman Sam Ginn says, when completed, the FirstNet network will be the largest and most complex network in the world. And Sam is actually, I used to work for him maybe 20 years ago. He's built networks around the world from commercial service providers, and he's saying this is something he's never done before. Okay, We built the network. There it is. How are we going to use this? Well, first off, want to emphasize this over and over. The FirstNet network is a data network. It's not, at least for the foreseeable future and probably my career, going to be ready for mission critical voice. And so if anybody looks at, there's a bean counter or a budget manager and says, hey, we don't have to upgrade your LMR system, we got FirstNet on its way, now you got to upgrade the LMR system for the mission critical voice services that you need. However, what we've been doing these sorts of presentations in Oregon for over a year now, and what they coin is a thing called mission support. They define that this is a complementary technology. By definition, it won't be everywhere all the time, all at once, so at some point you're going to have to look at it as a complementary to what you're doing today. And this picture is a really good example of that. If you look, I'm going to get this button right yet. He's not only got his radio, but he's talking on his cell phone. Well, imagine that instead maybe he's tapping on a tablet. It's going to help what you do today doing better and different kind of a flow. All right, here's a list. If you wanted to know what you could do with high-speed broadband data with FirstNet, there's an extensive list. But what I want to emphasize is one thing that Andy Sable, he's a industry pundit that spent years in the LMR, and now he's actually did some bandwidth testing for video in San Francisco a few years back. But he says, for the present, LTE is about data, it's about video, it's not about mission-critical voice. And so let's talk about that video stuff. You're going to be able to do all sorts of things. Moving from 3G to 4G is equivalent of 10 times faster speeds. And so you're really going from a garden hose to a fire hose in terms of bandwidth. It's going to allow one-way, two-way video, high-definition video. You're going to be able to push large files around. So when next generation 911 comes online and a call taker receives a high-resolution photo, well, you'll be able to send it out on the FirstNet to the person addressing the incident. There's going to be opportunity for all sorts of geolocation applications, because now you can send plots and maps and pictures, floor plans. All of those large files become just something that you don't have to think special about. How am I going to get this out to the field? One of the things that's particularly interesting to me is, I don't know how much you follow like the Silicon Valley talk, and right now they're talking about the Internet of Things, how we're going to have machine-to-machines talking over the Internet. Same thing is going to happen in public safety, and that's where we're going to see some benefits. For example, combining some of these applications together, say an officer doing a routine traffic stop. Before the car pulls over, before he even puts his vehicle into park, the automated license plate reader will have read that license, went back on those databases through that network you saw, come back and provided him information before he gets out of his car, leaves his car door, about the vehicle, about the person in the vehicle, all sorts of information, which just makes for a safer and more productive response. If you go onto YouTube, this is actually on there. Just you can, let's see, probably search on Patrick Jackson, and you'll get it. But what it is an implementation, a prototype using Google Glass of the similar thing that you saw in the GoldenEye video, but much, much simpler. But yet, even though it's really, if you look at it, it only has about 3 data pulls. He asks for fire hydrants. He asks for where to a plan of where to cut a vehicle open to free a accident. Anyways, those things become real powerful. It just adds, even with the simple addition of this kind of information, a whole different way to approach and address and respond to an incident. All right, at this point, now time for something different. I'm going to introduce Hector Rodriguez here from the California Office of Emergency Services, and we're going to kind of switch gears now and go from the future and the network and the application to what's happening now and where are we going from here.
Thanks, Michael. Well, Michael does all the heavy lifting in all of our presenting. I'll briefly go over the governance here and see if I can work the slides here as well. As Michael said, I'm Hector Rodriguez. I'm with Cal OES Public Safety and Communications, and we call our team FirstNet in California. The core group of us that are pushing out the outreach. So we'll start here with the governance, and I'll quickly go over this. The FCC, responsible for providing the 700 megahertz public safety spectrum. We have the NTIA, part of the Department of Commerce, and then we get into FirstNet and the Board of Directors, which is really what we're here to speak about. FirstNet is the managing entity of the public safety spectrum and is governing the nationwide public safety broadband network. So here's really where I come into play at the state level. The State of California Governor's Office, per the Act, designates the officer in the government body to coordinate with FirstNet, and at some point in the future, we'll make a decision on whether to opt in or opt out. Cal OES now has designated our SPOC, our state point of contact, which is Karen Wong, our Assistant Director of Public Safety and Communications. Through that, she chairs the CalFriend Board and acts as the administrator and the financial manager. Okay, so now we get down to who's on the CalFriend Board. And you can take a look at the list of folks here that will be representative of these different agencies and groups. We've got the associations of fire chiefs, the police chiefs, California Highway Patrol, Department of Finance, and many of these folks you may know. We even have tribal nations. The Governor's Office and Tribal Advisor, and Cynthia Gomez, is an integral part of the CalFriend Board. Here's a snapshot of the committees. So we start with FirstNet, then the communication drops down to the CalFriend Board. The CalFriend Board hosts their board meetings on the first Wednesday every other month. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit about that schedule a little bit later. But some of the committees that currently are working with the CalFriend Board: California Statewide Interoperability Executive Committee, Mutual Aid Regional Advisory Committee, State 911 Advisory Board, our Technical Advisory Committee, our Tribal Advisory Committee. And those two were just recently formed. And I'm sure that here in the near future, we will have several other committees that will come on board and be formed. So communication with FirstNet, how does that work? Okay, so we have FirstNet there at the top. And how do we communicate? FirstNet in the state of California is through the California SPOC. So Karen Wong is the direct contact through that. Going through CalFriend Board and then down through the stakeholders. And this is a key component. This slide is really where I work day to day. And it's working with the communication between the CalFriend Board, the stakeholders, and then also getting the communication out from the stakeholders to everyone else. And it virtually is everyone else. And you will see if you've received our emails, we ask you to please share with any public safety professional so that we can get the word out and we can get feedback and communication back. So as we said, the Governor's Office, Cal OES, is responsible for representing California public safety at the federal level. Under the NTIA SLIGP grant, Cal OES is responsible for building the nationwide public safety broadband network and FirstNet awareness in California. So again, we come to the group, FirstNet in California. We're going to be going out to a town near you, and we may have already been there. What are some of the things that we're doing to execute on this outreach? As I mentioned, we developed our core team. And what you will see in the emails or in the outreach, we're referred to as FirstNet in California. We've hired a public safety broadband consultant, SAIC, Michael Boyden and his team. We've held a kickoff meeting and planning workshop, which was done a few months back. Through that, we've developed an educational and outreach plan. What is in that plan? Well, some of the things that we have today that are over here at the table, some flyers, these presentations, and our town hall meetings. We've conducted 2 town hall meetings to date. Our first one was in Lake County, Lakeport, on July 16th. Very successful there, and we just held our second one yesterday in Bakersfield. We will be hosting our next town hall meeting right here in Fairfield. I know it's Vacaville, but Fairfield, on September 24th. We invite you all to please come on out. We will be getting the communications out probably within the next week. So before you leave, if you can, please drop off a card over at the table so that if you're not getting correspondence from us, that we can get that out to you. Okay? Prior to that, though, we will be having our OEC workshop, which is coming up at the end of the month here in Rancho Cordova at the Department of Technology. This is a key workshop for us because we're really looking for feedback. We want to understand what your needs are, what your desires are, and what the assets are that are out there available to help support the Nationwide Public Safety Broadband Network. So that is on the 26th of this month, Rancho Cordova. There is a flyer here as well, which will have the link on there to go ahead and attend personally, or at the town hall meetings, not at the workshop. We do broadcast through webcast, and it will also be on our website. And that's it. Next steps for California. Thanks, Michael.
All right, we're on the downhill side to lunch now. Well, what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about those next steps. What's happening in California, what's happening with the program, the initiative of FirstNet altogether. Here's another eye chart. This was released by FirstNet. It's a 46-step process for how they're going to consult, how they're going to work with the states when they develop the network design for this nationwide network. I will not go through all steps, but I do want to point out up at the top here, these tabs, there's like a preliminary design review, an intermediate design, and then finally get a state plan. At the end, as Hector had mentioned, the end of the day, there's an opt-in, opt-out decision that's been specified in the act, and that's made by the state's governor. Do you want to be part of the FirstNet network and have them build it in your state or not? And so this is what the process and the state's level of participation kind of in the middle. But what I want to emphasize, again, because you guys are a technical crew, is that what this really is it's an iterative design process. You start out with the preliminary design review, they bring it to the states. That's when they have that state consultation meet. They say, this is fine, but this part isn't, or gee, you forgot all about that. And so they keep doing that until it's kind of like building software, a spiral methodology, until you finally end up with that final design that then gets presented to the governor. Where we are now, well, we're right at the beginning. And that meeting that's going to happen at the end of this month that Hector mentioned with the Department of Homeland Security Office of Emergency Communications is right there. The first thing that has to happen for the state of California to get to the first meeting, which is the initial consultation, is there's a readiness checklist. There's a series of things that they have to bring to FirstNet and say, hey, look, we're ready to have you come and talk with us because we've got these in place. Some of the things that are in that checklist include the governance process. For example, the California First Responders Network Board, that kind of structure has to be in place and be defined and be documented before they're ready to meet. Okay, let's just talk a little bit about this meeting that's going to happen at the end of this month in Rancho Cordova. This is a voluntary meeting. It's, again, not put by FirstNet, but rather by the Office of Emergency Communications. It's a preview, really, of those follow-on meetings that are going to happen as part of that 46-step process. What they're going to do is they're going to come and they're going to provide maps, overlays, GIS overlays, with all sorts of infrastructure about California, kind of the first straw animal cut of what this will be. So they'll be looking at, remember we talked about that 3-in-1 architecture, they'll be saying, well, where we think you'll end up with in-building coverage, or where you may need vehicular modem coverage, or gee, we can't get there from here on LTE, we're going to use satellite deployables. They'll come in with preliminary maps. They'll take it a step further. They'll go in there and say, what is your critical infrastructure? Well, from the public information we have, here's what we think. We think you've got areas that are, military bases or airports or ports or courthouses or prisons or critical infrastructure like pipelines. All those are areas you're going to want coverage for this data network. Now, the key process here, though, is the next step is for us as California, all the stakeholders, and we're all stakeholders in this, as Hector calls them, we're going to get in there and need to tell them what's missing or what needs to be corrected, what our priorities are, because we can't have it all everywhere. And what happens is, well, for example, in Oregon, they were a pilot for this workshop this about a year and a half ago. And when we were there, they noted that, hey, there's a courthouse here and there's a prison over here, those should be covered. And what they didn't have covered is, well, you're always transporting prisoners to and from court appearances along this highway. The last thing you want is to have your person accompanying the prisoner to have service here, and not somewhere in the middle. And so those are the sort of things that you're going to want to be able to tell FirstNet about to inform them as they design the design. A lot of it's local information. We are pretty familiar with it here, but a few years back, there'd be very few people back east that would realize that tens of thousands of people appear in the high desert in Nevada for Burning Man at a certain time of year and require emergency services. Same thing goes with all sorts of recurring events. It looks like a guilty party back there. We've got the same sorts of events here in California. Things that recur, particular characteristics, unique things that we need to tell them about, or else we're going to have a hole in the coverage that we need. One final thing I want to mention about this is this whole process requires a different mindset from us. In the past, if you were going to build a radio network and you're involving the feds, you were probably asking them for money. You were applying for a grant, and they give you the grant monies, and then you build what you need. Not so with FirstNet. With FirstNet, the monies come from the spectrum auctions. FirstNet keeps the money and then asks you what you need. You tell them what you need, and then they build it and then charge you a recurring service fee for it. So what happens is the shift becomes, I need, make sure I get enough money, to I got to make sure I get the right coverage. So it's very, very important in these processes to tell them what you need so that at the end of the day, you got something that's worth paying for. Okay, let's talk timeline. Do the road to FirstNet. It's a long road, but where we're at right now in this period is the FirstNet organization is working on their business plan. Right now they've got a roadmap to the business plan, kind of like that 46-step process, but they do a lot of planning. There's in parallel, why we're here is we're under a grant that's also part of the act that said, hey, because the states need to be involved, you need to inform what this is in the first place. So there's grant monies to do outreach, and that's what we're doing right now. And there will also be then, that's phase one. Phase two will be, okay, now that you know about FirstNet, let's collect data. And so there'll be opportunities to tell them in terms of data collection what kinds of requirements we have for this network. That's going to be happening near term. In parallel, right now, FirstNet is developing what they call a comprehensive RFP. They're going to be going out to the Alcatels, the service provider, or the equipment providers, the service providers, the Sprints, the AT&Ts, T-Mobiles, and say, hey, we need this network here. The Act requires them to leverage existing infrastructure as much as possible. So they're going to be looking at things that not only commercial carriers have built, but also assets that you have. If you've just put in a metropolitan fiber backbone, we could sure use that for backhaul. Or if there's a particular site, and you'll see that in the slide here, where you happen to have an LMR tower that is in a good place for LTE. It's not on the mountaintop, so if you put the LTE on there, you just light the top of the mountain, but rather maybe it's in an urban area. That's an opportunity to leverage that, and that will lower the cost for everyone in terms of the service. And then the first thing that they'll do in terms of building, will be building that network core. Network core is nothing but special purpose computers running in tier 4 or 5 data centers, and they'll be redundant, they'll be diverse. There'll probably be 2, 3, 4 locations, spread across the U.S. to support those. What happens after that? Well, you get the RFP, you award the RFP. On the state level, what happens is that you get to that point where the design is finished to the point where it's presented to the governor and makes that decision. That part is the next step. We built the core, then you have to build out that RAN, that radio access network, so that'll go state by state. Once it's up and going, you can start talking about integrating it into the things you use today. And by that time, it'll be tomorrow, so you can talk about integrating it to things like next generation 911. This will go on. Spectrum auctions being conducted. money's flowing in, things being built, until 2022. That's the last spectrum auction. 2 years ago, that felt like a long time from now, but now I'm beginning to wonder because it's coming up faster than you think. At this point, the law requires the network to have to be substantially in operation, is the words it uses. Because at this point, at 2022, Treasury takes back the unused funds. OMB comes in here and asks and does a network assessment of FirstNet's performance. The FCC has the opportunity to not renew the license. It's a 10-year allocation right now, and so there's that. So it's really important this thing gets substantially built out and is a success by that time, or bets may be off. That's a long time out. Let's talk about what's happening with FirstNet right now. Right now, just for California and a few other places, there were grants that came out of NTIA, the area that did the grants for like what we're doing right now, what's called BTOP, Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. This happened before the FirstNet Act. Well, certain entities, in this case, the Los Angeles Regional Interoperable Communications Joint Powers Authority, LA-RICS, had received a BTOP grant and a waiver for that to use that 700 megahertz spectrum. With FirstNet coming, they pulled that spectrum back because now it was going to be allocated nationally. But then they assessed the 20 or so BTOP holders and decided, well, which go forward and which don't. Only about 7 were in the short list, and now there's, I think 3 fell out. I think there's about 4 that are going forward. LA is one of them. And so they're moving ahead with an LTE network in parallel with their LMR build that they're doing down there. And it's substantial, frankly. It's going to cover the 34,000 public safety personnel that's in more than 80 public safety agencies in LA County. And just for comparison, talking to our partner in the north here in Oregon, state of Oregon, and the entire state has about 20,000 first responders. So this is a big deal. The one thing I wanted to point out is they were able to find, of all the over 200 sites that they're going to put up for this LTE network, they found about 10% of them that they could actually co-locate. And so that's an important thing to think about. Timing for them, they're on the fast track. As I said, they got their money a long time ago. It's a 5-year expiration date. Well, funds expire next year. So right now they are working at, they got to get the design in, get it completed. They've awarded, it's a 200 and I think it's $175 million for the LTE network. So $175 million, they've awarded that, and they've got to get building. They'll start building this fall, and they really need to be into maintenance mode by August because that's when the funds expire. The exciting thing about this for me is this is an opportunity for all of California because this puts a lessons learned, a technology showcase, a place to shake things down right here in our state that we'll be able to learn from as we move forward with the overall FirstNet deployment. This 231-site LA-RICS network will be the largest public safety broadband network in the U.S. until FirstNet gets substantially built out. Okay. No keynote would be complete without a call to action. So before lunch, here's what you need to do. Get engaged. Right now, that's about all we ask at this point, but let us tell you a little bit about how to do that. Learn more about FirstNet. We were talking in here before this, as we were just talking about here earlier. There's a lot that folks know, and there's a lot of things folks don't know yet about this whole LTE network and FirstNet as an initiative from the federal level. There are lots of things online that are available. FirstNet has a website now. It just came up this spring, firstnet.gov. Lots of information on there. Cal EMA has the CalFern, puts all the board meetings, their videos on there. So you just search for CalFern and you can get that. SAIC, like I say, we've been doing this for a while. We actually developed a website, informational website for the state of Oregon. It's got like articles and videos and web links to other other areas that in the internet that'll be useful, and it also has a news page where it actually provides up-to-date things that are coming in from various sources, so you know what's happening just today if you want to know what was hot about FirstNet. Thing we ask you to do is once you've got all this knowledge, is to share it. Talk to your staffs, let them know what's happening about this. Talk to your peers, the folks that would be involved in public safety communications. And if you need somebody to talk to about getting a speaking engagement, or when are we going to talk about it next, talk to Hector. Or, well, you call those numbers, you'll get Hector. And he's part, like he said, of a multi-person team. And so they're hard at this. And then finally, the technology itself, like I say, your technology group, learn more about all those upper layers I was talking about by just getting online and looking at the differences. You know, there's things you're familiar with, there's things that are kind of new about this. You know, look at what kind of applications might be used on this. Talk about the types of devices and understand how that might fit into your organization. Now, one of the things that's happening in terms of that data collection is the California Office of Emergency Services, the California FirstNet organization, has issued a survey. That's out now. They actually had a training session on how to input to it about a week or two ago. Make sure your representative gets your information in there. It's going to be information. It's pretty basic to start. It's like what mobile data are you using today? What are your priorities? You need internet access. You need emails. Do you need to get to your CAD systems? You need to get to that criminal justice information, license databases, and how many users you got. All this will be information that will be the preliminary to that official data collection when FirstNet gets there. The thing you can do is I showed you that California map. There is, as Hector points out, that preview of coming events in terms of how you'd interact with FirstNet and what our coverage requirements are happening at the end of this month. And so the seating's limited on that, but I think there's still spaces, aren't there, Hector? So get in early and get a seat. Finally, for your organizations, this is, as you saw, is a multi-year process. But one of the things you can do now is start thinking about this in terms of, well, if you had it today, who are your users? There's in the Act, there's what they call primary first responders, and then there's secondary first responders. Primary first responders are the hoses, bandages kind of things, the fire, sheriff, police, emergency medical. But there's also folks that they would fall in the classification, they're still defining it, called secondary responders. And that would be like, for example, the guys that clear the fallen trees off the road so the fire truck can get through, so the utilities and public works, folks like that. The more people we can get on this network, the lower the cost is for everyone, and the more chance that we're going to have something that's viable and useful. How are you going to govern? Once you have this, it's just like any other communications asset. You're going to have to decide, well, who gets this device, who doesn't, what are they going to use it for, what's the process for priority and preemption in your area, if that's a requirement. How are you going, who gets the bill? How are you going to train folks on how to use your applications that you've developed or have signed on to? All those sorts of things you can be thinking about now. And then finally, actually up at the top there, if there's an opportunity for reuse of existing assets, like you have just built that metropolitan fiber network with lots of capacity, or you just are updating let's say a radio site that you've decided to go with a fiber to it to connect it. Understand who's actually the decision maker, because when FirstNet comes, lots of times there's lots of people on a tower, and no one's real clear exactly, well, who can make that decision, you know, who's got the base agreement. So you need to understand that in advance so you'll be ready when asked. All right, and the last thing is help us with that managing expectations part. Let people know this is a data network, it's not mission critical voice. Don't worry about your LMR, it's going to remain here. Maybe worry about your LMR because it's going to remain here. But LTE will provide you that complementary technology. It's going to provide these new exciting services, frankly, in terms of both the data, the video, that machine-to-machine sorts of things. And so once this gets online, we really won't understand the true power and value. Just like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, people never dreamed of what we do today routinely on a smartphone. Same thing's going to be for public safety.